If you can make your first $100,000, you're far closer to becoming a millionaire than you probably realize. In this video, I'm going to show you why that first $100,000 is the hardest milestone you'll ever reach, why almost everyone quits before getting there, and how everything, from making money to investing to building real wealth, becomes dramatically easier once you cross that line, even if you're starting with no money, no connections, and no special talent. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your first $100,000 isn't just another financial milestone. It's the moment that changes everything. Hey, I'm Michael. For the longest time, I thought making more money was just about working harder. I was always looking for the next side hustle, reading personal finance books, watching videos, basically trying everything I could think of, but it still felt like I was spinning my wheels. It wasn't until I realized that building my first $100,000 wasn't really about working more. It was about changing the way I thought about money and following a strategy that actually worked. Once I finally crossed that milestone, everything started to feel different. Building wealth became simpler, progress came faster, and I finally understood why so many successful investors obsess over that first six figures. That's why I wanted to make this video, so hopefully you can avoid some of the mistakes that kept me stuck for way longer than they should have. So here's the idea that completely changed the way I think about money. Most people assume becoming a millionaire is the hardest part of building wealth. But Charlie Munger, the legendary investor who worked alongside Warren Buffett for decades, had a completely different perspective. He believed the hardest part isn't making your first million, it's making your first $100,000. And honestly, when I first heard that, I thought, how can that possibly be true? If $1 million is 10 times more money, shouldn't it be 10 times harder? Well, not exactly. Here's why. When you're starting from zero, every dollar depends on you. You're earning it through your job, your business, a side hustle. Whatever it is, you're doing almost all of the work. At the same time, you're trying to build good financial habits. Figure out investing, stop wasting money on things you don't really need, and avoid mistakes that can set you back for years. It feels slow because, honestly, it is. Imagine trying to push a huge boulder up a hill. At first, it barely moves. Every step takes effort. That's what building your first $100,000 feels like. But once you finally get that boulder over the top, everything starts moving a little easier. That's exactly what happens with your money. Once you've built that first $100,000, your investments start pulling some of the weight. Instead of relying only on your paycheck, your money starts earning money too. Then those returns begin generating their own returns. That's compound growth. The funny thing is, compounding doesn't feel impressive in the beginning. For years, it can seem like almost nothing is happening. Then, almost without realizing it, you reach a point where your investments start growing faster than the money you're putting in yourself. That's when things really begin to accelerate, and that's why so many investors say the second $100,000 comes much faster than the first. But, and this is important, getting to $100,000 doesn't guarantee you'll become wealthy. In fact, this is exactly where a lot of people go backwards. Not because they stop earning, because they start spending. The biggest trap is something called lifestyle inflation. You've probably seen it happen. Someone gets a raise. A few months later, there's a new car in the driveway, a nicer apartment, more expensive holidays, designer clothes, better restaurants. Their income goes up, and somehow they're still living paycheck to paycheck. Sound familiar? The problem isn't making more money. The problem is letting your lifestyle grow just as fast as your income. After years of sacrificing, it's completely understandable. You tell yourself, I've worked hard for this. I deserve it. And honestly, you probably do. But every time your income increases, you have a choice. You can use that extra money to buy a better lifestyle today, or you can use it to buy yourself more freedom tomorrow. That's the trade-off. Wealthy people understand something that isn't obvious when you're getting started. Every dollar you spend today isn't just a dollar that's gone. It's also a dollar that never gets the chance to compound into $10, $20, or maybe even $50 in the future. So before you make a big purchase, try asking yourself one simple question. Is this helping me build the life I actually want? Or am I just trying to impress people? That one question alone can completely change the way you make financial decisions. One of the questions I get all the time is, okay, once I finally hit $100,000, what should I actually do next? The good news is, you don't need some complicated strategy. In fact, the people who build lasting wealth usually keep things surprisingly simple. There are really three moves that matter most. The first one isn't flashy, but it's probably the highest return investment you can make. Get rid of high-interest debt. Think about it this way. If you're paying 18% interest on a credit card while hoping your investments earn 10% a year, you're moving backwards. Before your investments even have a chance to grow, that debt is eating away at your progress. Paying it off isn't just about reducing stress, it's a guaranteed return because you're stopping money from leaving your pocket every single month. Once you've taken care of that, the next step is building an emergency fund. I know it's not the most exciting thing to talk about, but life has a habit of throwing expensive surprises at you when you least expect them. Maybe your car breaks down. Maybe you lose your job. Maybe you get hit with a medical bill or a major home repair. If you don't have cash set aside, you're often forced into making bad financial decisions, selling investments when the market is down or going right back into debt. Neither of those is ideal. Having 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses gives you something that's hard to put a price on. Peace of mind. It means you can stay invested without panicking every time life throws you a curveball. Now, once you've done those first two things, this is where people often overcomplicate everything. They finally have some money invested and suddenly feel like they need to become expert stock pickers. They start chasing the latest crypto, they try day trading, they jump from one can't-miss investment to the next because they think that's how wealthy people get ahead. The reality is, most of the time, it's not. Some people absolutely get lucky, but most long-term wealth isn't built through exciting investments. It's built through consistency. That's why so many successful investors stick with broad, low-cost index funds. They're diversified, they're simple, and over long periods of time, they've historically performed incredibly well. More importantly, they allow you to focus on the one thing that really matters: staying invested. Automate your investments if you can, keep contributing whether the market is up or down, and resist the urge to constantly tinker with your portfolio, because the biggest advantage most investors have isn't finding the perfect investment. It's simply giving their investments enough time to grow. Is that boring? Maybe. But boring is often what builds wealth. Another thing that's worth taking advantage of is any retirement match your employer offers. If your company is willing to match your contributions, that's essentially free money. Opportunities like that don't come around very often, so it makes sense to take full advantage of them. And if you have access to tax-advantaged investment accounts, use them. The less money you lose to taxes over the years, the more stays invested, and the more compounding can do its job. Now, here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. As your money starts growing, your mindset has to grow with it. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, it's natural to think about next week or next month. You're focused on paying the bills, covering rent, getting through the month. There's nothing wrong with that. But once you've started building wealth, you have to zoom out. Instead of asking, what do I want this year? Start asking, where do I want my life to be 10, 20, or even 30 years from now? Because money by itself isn't really the goal. Freedom is the freedom to spend more time with your family, to retire earlier, to start a business, to travel, to choose how you spend your time instead of feeling like you have to sell it. When you have a clear picture of the life you're building, it's much easier to ignore the distractions. And trust me, there will be plenty of them. As your income goes up, so does the pressure to spend more. You'll see people buying bigger houses, driving nicer cars, taking luxury vacations. Social media doesn't exactly help either. It constantly makes it look like success is something you wear or something you drive. But appearances can be deceiving. Some people look rich, other people quietly become rich, and those are two very different things. More often than not, the difference comes down to discipline. The same habits that help you reach your first $100,000 are the habits that help you reach $1 million. Living below your means, investing consistently, avoiding unnecessary debt, thinking long-term instead of chasing quick wins. The strategy doesn't suddenly become more complicated as your portfolio grows. If anything, it becomes even more important not to overcomplicate it. So if you're still working toward your first $100,000 and it feels like progress is painfully slow, don't assume you're doing something wrong. That's just how the journey starts. You're climbing the steepest part of the mountain. Every dollar you save, every investment you make, every good financial habit you build, it's all creating momentum that your future self will benefit from. And if you've already crossed that $100,000 mark, congratulations. But don't think of it as the finish line. Think of it as the point where the game finally starts to change, because once you've built the right habits and your investments begin compounding on their own, wealth starts growing in a very different way. The hardest part isn't becoming wealthy overnight, it's staying patient long enough to let the process work, and once it does, that's when everything changes. If there's one thing I hope you remember after watching this, it's this. Your first $100,000 isn't important because of the number. It's important because of who you have to become to get there. Along the way, you learn discipline, you learn patience, you learn how to delay gratification, you build skills that most people never stick with long enough to develop. And those habits end up being far more valuable than the money itself, because once you've built that foundation, growing your wealth becomes less about working harder and more about staying consistent. But there's still one big question left. Once you've built that first $100,000, what's the smartest way to actually invest it? Should you pay off debt first? Build your emergency fund, max out retirement accounts, invest in index funds, or is there a better order that helps every dollar work a little harder? That's exactly what I cover in the next video. I'll walk you through the exact sequence I would follow if I were starting today, so you can avoid expensive mistakes and make sure every dollar is working as hard as possible. I'll see you in that video.